Down to where we had left off. We had talked about Plato, and now you have some notes for Plato, right? You'll probably have a duplicate of page 4, and that's fine. You'll have a duplicate of almost all of them, to be honest, but they won't be filled out. So you see here in the previous one, Plato was blank, just the name. Now you've got notes, okay? And again, I'm trying to help us move along. You don't have to take all of these notes. I think there's just a few things that you should focus on and be able to remember. Our goal here, if I can give you a focus for what we're about to just go through, and we're going to go through it fairly briefly, because you don't have to remember all the details. If you were taking a higher level social class, then I would spend more time on the details, and we're not. But the goal here is that you want to understand why there are many types of governing or leading styles in the world. Because, and the why is important, because each one of them thinks that they're addressing some part of human behavior or nature that's necessary. So if it's a dictatorship, then they have a belief that people need to be controlled. People can't be trusted to make decisions or follow instructions on their own. So then they need to be made to do that with force. Or if it's, say, a democracy, the assumption with a democracy will be that people can make educated decisions, they can have a part in choosing a leader, they can be trusted to abide by the laws that the group makes, right? So every government style has a reason or a belief, a background for why it was created that way. Plato, he thought people were decent. They could use their intellect. We talked about him already. And we have talked about Hobbes, which is the next guy. And he was the one we played the whiteboard game. You can put here the whiteboard game, because that may trigger a memory for you. People were harsh, selfish, made choices for themselves, not for each other's betterment. And the deal, this part here is the kicker. If everybody agreed to give up rights, then everybody could live somewhat fairly. But it only worked if everybody agreed to give up the same rights and then get the same protections, right? And the deal with him, though, is he didn't think that just a regular person could be trusted to be that deciding power. He wanted a monarch, and so that's where we have a monarchy there. And here you can put things like the United Kingdom. And this includes some overlap of the slides that you made in your groups. United Kingdom, Belgium, Spain, these are some countries that still include monarchs.
Are we supposed to write these down?
Yeah, please. I've typed up most of this so that there's very little that you're writing down, right? So the part that we highlighted or put the star beside is the most important part, right? And that leaders should have absolute power. It should be a king or queen that God appointed was his idea, right? Okay, and then we have John Locke. And so this guy here was influenced by the ideas of Hobbes. The guy above, right? I tried to find you some cartoons here. So the cartoon here says, "You don't kill me, I won't kill you." Hey, that sounds great. So as simple as a cartoon can be, but it might trigger a memory for you on an exam, for example. I gave your handout questions to Mrs. Millsap, and she was going to send them on. Is that what you're coming for?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so then John Locke was a guy that thought that people were basically good. So it's in the first line that it kind of says what their line of thinking was. And if people are basically good, then they can control their actions, right? So they can be trusted in society. But when or if people do things wrong, it's because of circumstances in society. So social problems. So that's the mindset that says it's not an individual's fault if they've committed a crime. If they stole bread, why didn't they have enough money to pay for it themselves, right? If they committed a crime, what was the cause of the dispute between them? Yes?
What's the last word that you wrote down?
Problems?
Or better?
Here? Up?
Yeah.
Hobbes is the name of the guy above, right? Yeah. And remember, I can give you copies of this too. Okay. So he thought everybody in society needed to make sure that they had certain things. If everyone has their health, their freedom, and possessions, then there should be no crime. Right? And it was society's job to ensure that everybody got those three things. Does this list of things look familiar at all? Life, liberty, and something? It's the American. It's the three values that America was founded on: life, liberty, and pursuit of their individual happiness. Not collective happiness, but individual, right? And yeah, then there should be no crime. So he believed in democracy, which is where we're leading to next. We live in a democracy. We're going to focus more on a democracy here, meaning that the citizens can elect their leader, so they choose who they want to be a decision maker, except at the time it was only rich men that were able to vote or be elected. So it excluded some people, because this is from a long time ago. But in a way, is this much different? Do you think that it's often rich people that are still our decision makers? What do you think? It is. I mean, it's often lawyers, it's doctors, educated people who can afford to leave their positions for a while and take on that job, although they make a heck of a lot of money, right? And here's the deal. He thought that people would obey in exchange for those freedoms, ensuring that they got those things that society could afford them. But here's something that's new. He thought that citizens had the right to take over a government if the government wasn't providing for them. And that's new so far, a new idea. This was revolution or protesting or something like that, right? If the government wasn't providing for them, then people could push back. And this is kind of the definition of democracy. One of the definitions of democracy. But consent of the people. People votes. Majority rules. That's how our members of parliament were elected, members of legislature were elected. So he was the first one that kind of had an idea of what would become democracy. Now, some of you did representative democracy compared to pure democracy, and can any of those people tell me the difference between the two, or what is representative democracy? As you look coyly to each other. I explained it to you. Do you not remember?
Yeah.
But you're just nervous because I'm putting you on the spot. If you think that there's the whole of Canada as an example, that there are individuals across Canada that you have elected that get sent to Ottawa, and those people represent you. You don't get a say, or your parents don't get a say every time that there's a new bill or a new law that comes up for a vote. The person that you sent as your area's representative, that person decides, and they are intended to represent. Now, if they've been selected, that means that their party was the majority selection of the people in that area, right? So does anybody know who the current MP for this area is? It was at one time Miss Yelich across the highway. She was the person that ran in this riding, in this territory. I sound like a Westerner. I don't know offhand. Yeah, and it's different what the provincial one is. It'll actually come up because you'll actually look it up. But I can use Mrs. Yelich as an example. She ran as a member of the Conservative Party. The majority of people in her area selected her. And that meant that she went to represent all these people, and she represented a conservative ideology, made decisions based on that conservative ideology. And Janelle looks really...
Is it Emma Little?
Is it?
No.
I'm not sure. It'll come up, it's part of an assignment coming up, so you'll look it up. That's fine. But that's what representative means. Is you don't get your individual vote, somebody votes and represents you with their vote. Do you want me to write that down? Someone elected in your, I'll say riding, but then I'll back it up with area, is sent to Ottawa to vote on your behalf. Ottawa. It's also the Canadian capital, and that's where the House of Commons is. Right? Sent to Ottawa to vote on your behalf. That's what representative democracy means. Okay? So that means Canada is one. Canada, United States. Right? They elect leaders who then represent the votes of citizens in Parliament or in their House of Congress or whatever. India is another one. So the social contract says here, I agree to protect you. He's wearing jewels, but that just, I mean, he's rich, but you could also assume that like he's educated, for example. So I agree to protect you, I'll represent you, and then this person says I agree to obey the laws that you help develop. That's the social contract in a democracy. There's pros and cons. More people are equal under the law because everybody gets a say, right? It's not that choices are made from the top down and imposed on citizens. Everybody gets to vote. The majority, you could highlight that. Democracies are good for the majority. Canada has a specific document that helps protect the minority, though. What is that document? The Charter. Yes, because majority rules, they would always get their say. We needed protection for our minorities as well. You can have a lot of freedom in a democracy, so freedom of speech, your press, your religion, all of that stuff, and anybody can run for office. But on the con side, it can be a lot slower to make laws because you're in competition with other ideologies, other people and their decisions. It's harder to get people to agree. You can have many tensions between parties. Government might shut down at times, or uninformed citizens are voting. And we're trying to inform you right now so that when you become voters, you're more aware, right? So pros and cons of this, pros and cons of any type. Okay, so we've talked about Hobbes thought people were cruel. They needed to give up rights in order to accept the freedom and be protected, but it would have to be a king that would protect them. And then we had Locke, who thought people are pretty good, and if they're causing harm, then it's because of the problems in society. A government needs to fix those problems in society, and then there should be no crime. People will obey, and in exchange, then they'll get those freedoms. Rousseau was also influenced by Locke. So we can put this here. So these were these new political ways of thinking. They influenced other thinkers. So he believed a lot of what the last guy did, but he thought, he agreed, people are pretty good. They can use reason and their intellect. But here's his difference. Bad governing can lead to bad people. So people are flawed, human beings can be flawed. If government is corrupt, it'll lead to a corrupt society. People can be corrupted, and so that was his concern. Meaning, as an example, that elected leader or elected MP could vote for himself, not his, what we call them, voters, right? If he's sent to represent you, and you as a majority would vote, say you want to strike down the prostitution law, that he maybe is corrupted or been bribed or enticed or something, he may not vote for you. Again, he still believed in democracy. This is another part of democracy. This whatever is best for society should be the law. Again, the majority. The majority of the will of the people. That's democracy. He thought an authoritarian, like a controlling type of government, could make things better for society. And it would work so long as the common needs of all people were met. As long as government followed the will of the people, then people should follow. Right? If needs are met, as long as government follows the will of the people, then people would follow. If their needs were met, right? And then they would follow along. He also thought, though, that government could force people to follow. Sometimes people don't know what's good for them if they're uneducated, right? He thought that if people started questioning the government, it could jeopardize the whole balance of things. So he thought that people could rebel if government or their leaders failed to do their job. So the only reason that you could rebel against your government if they were failing you. He wanted choices in the hands of people, not the aristocracy, which is the upper class or the rich people, the rich or wealthy. So he wanted decisions right in the hands of all the people. And life would be better if they would just follow the desires of the majority of people, and everybody would set aside their individual preferences. So his is a direct democracy, and this is different. And a direct democracy means that each citizen gets their votes. On all things, not just elections. So let's say that Switzerland wants to impose some type of a new criminal law. That vote goes to every citizen to decide on. It doesn't get passed in the House of Commons like Canada, where there's just, the 300 and some people that are elected by Canadians that make that decision. In Switzerland, every citizen makes their vote on the bills that are passed, the laws that are passed. What? Well, it's actually, if you guys were aware at all of when we had our federal election, I voted on my way home from work. Actually, my husband happened to be at the same, we went to the same polling station, of course. We happened to be there at the same time. It takes you 5 minutes. You show your ID, you go into the ballot box, put your little X wherever, and you were off on the way home. It was very simple and quick. It does come with a cost, but, smaller population in Switzerland. And for them, the motivation or the benefit of having each citizen vote means maybe people are more involved in government. Maybe each person feels that they are more represented. Did you know, we'll put this as a side note, in some countries, citizens can be fined or jailed if they do not vote.
I think it's like that in Australia.
It might be. And so if you have to force involvement in government action, it's kind of defeating the purpose in a way. If government is supposed to serve you and you don't let it serve you, so then you're charged. I mean, it's a weird circular reasoning. In a country like this, you might think that citizens may feel more involved in decisions because they've voted in them. So this is in Switzerland. That's one country that does have a direct democracy. There are some other locations that have direct, like states in the United States, or some indigenous councils will have each person that votes, but not as a country. So Switzerland's the only one. So then there's a little image here. And again, each one of them has a different idea about like whether man is good or bad, what society is like, the role of government, that government should be all-powerful and overthrow versus kind of in the way in that you can overthrow. Power should be absolute and not shared. It should be somewhat shared, or it should be shared and direct. This is the Switzerland one. Some differences there. Then we had a guy named Voltaire, who was French, and it was after the French Revolution. What's that? Viva la Revolution. This guy thought this French political thinker trusted aristocrats. Like, I don't know if you guys remember that there was a cartoon, The Aristocats.
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't there? Yeah. And they were hoity-toities, right? Rich people, upper class, so you might be thinking, royals or something like that, He trusted these people over government and church. Specifically, he didn't trust the church. He thought that these two things were corrupted and evil. That they had different goals or something like that. He advocated for free speech. Here's a famous saying that he said, "I may not agree with the word you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it." Which is still something that's relevant today. I may not agree with what you're saying, but you have every right to say it, and I'll support you in that right. Freedom of speech, right? Free speech relates to this, right? He was wary and believed that equality in society was impossible. And so this is at the center of his beliefs value system. He thought equality in society was an impossible achievement. And this is an interesting thing. Just consider this. The comfort of the rich depends upon an abundant supply of the poor. Anybody, what do you think of that? The comfort of rich people depends on poor people being taxed, working the less paying jobs, living in lower housing. What are you saying? Jeff Bezos? The comfort of the rich depends on an abundant supply of poor.
Amazon probably has lots and lots of workers.
Oh, Amazon has tons, yeah. Sure. If you think about this, there are few rich and many it does make sense, right? They talk about the top 1%. The majority of wealth in the world is controlled by less than 1% of the people in the world. So all those poor people make the rich lifestyles possible. And for him, the people that could make decisions should be the ones that had intellect, that were probably like educated. So here's an example. He distrusted democracy, which might sound strange to us, the decisions that were made by the majority. He thought that there was an idiocy in the masses. If you have a lot of people, they're probably not quite educated. Did you just do a jaw drop? Oh, you look like you did. Oh, it's hard to tell with the mask. So he talked about the idiocy of the masses, that people were too optimistic, they were foolish, they were intolerant of each other's ideas. And so these people, the majority, shouldn't be trusted to make decisions. Even in today's, Canada, for example, what percent of the population would you guess are truly educated when it comes to government, parties, voting?
14%.
14? 1, 4?
9.5.
Probably about half.
Huh?
About half.
Well, even if you think about the turnout for our voting, our turnout can be particularly low. So I know in some elections we've had less than half the population of Canada that's turned out to make the decision. So that's not even representing the majority. And if those are the ones voting, just think about the mindset of the ones not voting. The ones that are voting might have a similar mindset, so you're not getting majority. It can be pretty confusing. So we want a more educated citizenship. It's part of your responsibility as a citizen to become educated. And so for him, a monarchy could make those decisions. Monarchs weren't idiots, right? Royals, they would have been educated, well-trained. The idea might have been as well that they were appointed by a god of some sort. He has a line here, and he said, I would rather obey one lion, this should be than 200 rats of my own species, essentially.
Oh, so he's calling us a rat.
Did you say us? He's calling you rats, essentially, yes. He would rather obey one person, but a strong, knowledgeable person, than 200 people that are alike to him. Yeah. So he thought highly of himself, for sure. So his idea was not just a monarchy, but something he called a constitutional monarchy. And we have a number of places in the world today that have that. The UK has one, Canada. We do have a monarch. We sing her pictures on our money, for example. Japan. Norway. Some of those look like that.
I know some of them because we have guests getting on this.
Yes, you guys worked on this. So this is the difference between a constitutional monarchy, and you can put it like this. It is government. Well, just wait. Let me do government bigger. Government. And crown is really small. Right? Government has more power. Crown has less. Less, if any, power. Does the Queen have any power in Canada? No. She is a ceremonial figure. She represents it only in a historical sense, that historical connection, but she has no power over decisions, things like that. But there are other monarchies. If I go back up to the other one about monarchies, which would be Hobbes, his idea was crown was larger.
What does Queen do then?
And then government was small. So that's the difference between a monarchy and a constitutional monarchy, is which group in the relationship, government and crown, which of them has the real power and which has just a type of ceremonial power. For example, in this other one, the UK is the example. And whenever they have the new election, if they have a new election and there's a new prime minister in the United Kingdom, one of their first jobs is they go to Buckingham Palace, they come before the Queen, and she says, I invite you to form the government. And that's all her job is. She can't play favorites. She can't have a preference over one party or another. They have different parties like the Labour Party, or I think they also have Conservatives. But she can't show favoritism or anything like that. So she is largely, even in her own country, largely not involved in politics.
And what does she do?
She is the head of the country. It's hard. It's hundreds and hundreds of years of history. And there should be a lot of pride for anybody that is British or English, because they were a country that colonized half the world population.
Why do you can't claim if you don't know this?
Can you pull this up a little bit? Because they still have ceremony and stuff like that. They still have, there is the Commonwealth. There are a lot of other countries like in the Caribbean or in Africa that still are part of the British Commonwealth. There's some formalities and stuff that still exist. So, yeah.
Plus, she's never gonna die.
I don't know about that.
She's gonna last since like the 16th century.
Well, and then,
Is that not, like, it's not okay with you or what?
No, I'm just saying, she's gonna last since like the 16th century.
She
Don't
became queen very young. Yes, we can say that
You
for
don't
sure.
don't expect a British Commonwealth to go anywhere anytime soon.
That's right.
I wonder if they take the crown, I guess, like, they'll be like,
It will be Charles.
Charles.
Charles will get the crown. Okay,
If she dies.
her son. Her son.
Her eldest.
Here's an example that talks, this is also kind of looks at that idea that the poor contribute to the rich, right? For example, so if you see here that the big bag of money, says on it, wealth created by labor. This is by the poor, right? All that labor is done by poor people in rich people's factories. This rich guy has factories, and the poor people work there, but he benefits, right? They still need jobs because they still need to feed their kids, clothe their kids, pay for education, pay for healthcare, have a place to live. So it's a constant cycle, and it's hard for people to work their way out of it, because all the people in the rich upper class, they're going to make all those rules and decisions that keep them and people like them rich and keep other people poor. For example, they're going to keep wages low, because why would they pay people more? It just means more money out of their pocket, right? So it can seem like an unfair system. The working class, the ones that do the work, get this little tiny bundle of payment in repayment for all of the work and efforts that they've done. So this was seen as a problem. It's an imbalance between the labor people do and their financial reward or payment. And there was a German political thinker that thought this whole system needs to change in order to create better living circumstances for people in these societies. But it was never going to change without violence and revolution, because all these rich people were going to be the decision makers in government. They're going to make decisions that benefit them and not workers. So Karl Marx was his name. He was a German thinker, and he thought people are good and they can think for themselves, and they're not blind. They won't blindly follow. They can think for themselves. They can make up their own minds on things. He saw a world where people should be able to work for themselves and then personally benefit. Not work for a master of sorts in a way, right? It can be a constant cycle. that people might have a low-paying job even today, have a low-paying job, and then there's all your expenses, and every month you're never getting ahead a little bit. It's hard for some people. Even in Canada, if you recall, we said Jagmeet Singh brought it up last week. Here's this woman working 3 jobs. Wouldn't it be nice if she didn't have to work 3 jobs? And so it's a cycle. Karl Marx thought the people deserved to work or live in a society where the work they did, they could benefit from. The benefit didn't go to, someone who was rich and had opportunity. And here's the difference. I talked to you the other day and said that there's a different definition of freedom than just not behind bars. Freedom means you've got opportunities and choices. This could be an exam question, to be honest. What does it mean to be free? If you have opportunity and choices, if you're not bound to the restrictions, that woman doesn't have a lot of freedom, because if she's bound to working 3 different jobs, because she has to make ends meet and that's how she's doing it, she's not free. She can't choose to do more education to improve herself or something like that, right? It would come at a lot of cost and you'd need assistance. So who's going to look after your kids? Who's going to temporarily make your house payments or your mortgage or your rent payments is really what it would be. It's a constant cycle. He saw an imbalance of power between the factory owners and the factory workers. And he had specific names for them. And should I or shouldn't I ask you to know these for a test? Janelle? One is called the bourgeoisie, and the other is called the proletariats.
You're lucky if I can say that.
But it's just B and P. It's like backwards peanut butter. Bourgeoisie were the factory owners, the rich people who were hiring all these workers at low wages. And the proletariats were the workers.
How am I going to remember?
It's kind of, I personally kind of, I don't know.
It's Boston pizza.
Boston pizza.
I won't remember the words. Though.
Yeah, you probably won't, and I would probably provide them for you. But I don't know. I personally get some satisfaction out of knowing some cool words. Like cognitive dissonance makes me sound smart, doesn't it? Cognitive dissonance. It is something about the brain and behavior. You have all exhibited cognitive dissonance today, multiple times. Don't I sound smart?
What is it?
Cognitive dissonance is when there's you do a behavior or you're not doing a behavior. Let's say that you should have been studying for something and you put it off and you put it off and then it's the night before a test. And then you're thinking, I could even say I did it on Sunday night. I should have been marking, I should have been planning. And then it was already like 5:30 or 6 o'clock and I was like, okay, today's a write-off. I guess I get up extra early and I do the work tomorrow. Because I just mentally couldn't get into it in those last 3 or 4 hours of the night. I could have, but I mentally gave myself an excuse and said, well, the day's wasted, I might as well just let the whole day go. It's a mental excuse. So that you don't.
I do that so many times in a day.
You do.
It's a lot.
You do. For example, is there anybody in here that's wearing Nike right now?
In my locker.
Alexa, do you have Nike?
I have pairs in my locker.
No? You have 2 pair in your locker? Nike has been in the news here just recently because it's a little bit related to child labor. So then you have to make a decision. If you're buying Nike products because, they're good products, or they make really good commercials because they're promoting equality. They hired Kaepernick, or whatever his name is. Kaepernick, right? They must be a good company. Well, they also indulge in a little child labor.
So does that necessarily wear the shoes then?
Well, that's a good question. So that's the question. If you give yourself a mental out that it's okay that I do because they've made the shoes anyway. Exactly. That's exactly. What am I going to do? Throw them out? Right?
It's definitely a hard.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yes. Yeah. So that's an example of a conversation that you would have in psychology next semester if some of you choose to take it, because it's a super cool course. Okay, Bourgeoisie and proletariat. You're going to pop those words in conversation sometime this week, and whoever you're talking to are going to think that you're so smart. Just try saying the words. Bourgeoisie and proletariat. Proletariat. Alexa, I didn't hear you. Bourgeoisie and proletariat.
Bourgeoisie and
Yay!
proletarian.
Good. Okay. So we got it. Factory owners and workers. Okay? So factory owners were the rich wigs. They probably influenced government by bribes, right? They would make decisions that would keep things to protect the balance in society, meaning keep the rich rich and the poor poor. They would keep things the same. Keep the rich rich and the poor poor. That's the same. But the factory workers would want that continuity. And they exploited their workers and the people that were in poverty in order to keep their own wealth for themselves. Kind of like factories, big businesses not wanting to pay health benefits. For example, it was a handful of years ago, people started boycotting Tim Hortons because there was a negotiation, contract or labor dispute with Tim Hortons, and the employees got an agreement of something that they would get better health benefits or something like that, but in response to that, Tim Hortons cut wages. So then it seemed like, well, Tim Hortons, the big company, the corporate bad guy, people started, you could look it up, boycott Tim's. There have been a handful of reasons why people have wanted to boycott things, because we are living in cancel culture, right? You guys have all heard of that. But that's the same idea. Tim Hortons it intends to have a great reputation, but it is still a corporation. It's not even Canadian owned anymore.
No. That ruins it for me.
Did you not know?
Totally.
It's not Canadian owned anymore, but
I was always proud of going to Tim's.
I
Canadian.
know.
Fast food place.
That's like literally all over.
Yeah.
It's like that. That's like one of the main.
I go every Friday.
Oh, yeah, it's not Canadian owned anymore.
It's the best place on earth.
That erupted a great conversation here.
I'm not calling Tim.
Yeah, why isn't it Canadian?
It was, it's a company that it has shares. You can or own part of it, and then it's invested, and that the investment did really well, which then attracted foreign buyers, which then purchased it. Yes. Okay, I need to hear Marissa. Okay, you have to speak loudly.
No. I don't need it. Whatever. I kind of already know a lot of this stuff because of the movies I watch. Like, for instance, when you were talking about all that legal stuff,
Yes.
I was thinking, oh, hey, Legally Blonde too. And then while you're talking about the shares, I couldn't help to think of The Arrow where Oliver and that one lady fight over who gets the share of the company.
Oh, and that's exactly right. That's great.
Yeah, they're like, you have 49 and I have 49.
Yes.
Whoever gets the last percent wins.
Hey, very perfect.
I guess.
Perfect. Okay, but we don't want that, do we? We want a fairness, and we want workers that are able to, if somebody wants to really work their butt off, they should be able to rise up and gain some wealth, gain some property, become a factory owner themselves. That is the way it is in Canada. There are entrepreneurs. In America, there are entrepreneurs. It's the difference. Now we're starting to talk about the economic spectrum, not the political spectrum. But this Karl Marx thought, if you're going to upend that balance of the rich staying rich and the poor staying poor, you need a violent and radical revolution. Overtake it all. Take the factories away from the factory owners. Give everything to the workers. So then there are no owners. But that means that there's no wealth for anybody. It means take it all back and then share it equally, evenly. Right? And so a true change had to be violent and radical. After that, you needed, and here's kind of like the, you might say it under your breath. Okay, we need a dictator, but for a little while. Because we can't have a democracy where people are, majority rules or anything like that. Everybody is absolutely equal, but we do need a dictator for a while. We're going to restructure our political and economic system. Instead of owners having the factories, government's going to own the factories. Government will own it all, and it will share it out evenly to all. So people would work for themselves, not for factory owners. And now you don't have to control society with police, army, banks, and lending, because everybody will suddenly become equal in their work. Everybody will benefit equally. Some of this sounds okay, doesn't it? Some of it sounds okay. They might even live in communes, for example. Then people could be completely free, right? They would have, there would be no opportunity or choice because nobody has opportunity or choice. They just get everything, in a way. True communism means true equality of ownership, and there would be no class. There's no upper class or lower class. There's just one universal class. And it would mean that nobody had private property. It would become a class-free society. Under communism, and this is what we're talking about here, government provides people their clothing, their housing, their food, their education, their medical care, everything. They give you everything that you need, but no more than that. And here's the thing, if the state is giving you your clothes and food, everything would be no name, for example. You're not buying Libby's beans or Heinz. You don't have that luxury anymore. There'd be no name everything. If you actually look at a communist country, like when you go into a grocery store, everything is the same. There are no brands.
No losing lemons here. I don't think we support that.
There are no brands. Isn't that interesting? Just imagine a society, a whole country, where there are no brands in clothing, because everything is government made, everything is government provided. Really strange, isn't it?
The only thing they brand there.
Brown people.
And the jobs.
But
That's because there's only one big company that supplies everything.
Yeah, but they don't have the breadth.
But nobody can advance. So whereas in our country right now, like all of you are working hard to become educated, and educated is going to get you, there is a direct connection between the higher educated or more educated you are, the longer your lifespan is. I've mentioned that before, right? Here? Yeah. Because better health care, better access to food and nutrition, more active lifestyle, the freedom to live a more active lifestyle instead of working additional jobs, right? A better sleep system, all of that kind of stuff contribute to that. In Canada, you can advance even if you're born into poverty, as an example, or born into a lower class, or born into a community where there's a lot of drugs and crime and stuff like that. Every person can work themselves out in Canada because there are training programs, there's an equality of an education system, the medical is paid for you. You know, a lot of things are provided and opportunity exists for people. In a communist society, though, nobody can work. It doesn't matter how much harder somebody else works. They won't advance in any way. So what problem would you foresee that would cause for, would you agree some of you work harder in some classes than others? Can we just make that statement? Because that's a pretty generalized statement. Some people are more naturally, just feel more naturally comfortable and understand it in a more natural way. So they'll work hard at that class. And then there'll be another class or an activity that they just aren't naturally born into and comfortable with, and they won't work as hard, and vice versa. So Janita?
So I was wondering, with that, it's like if you work harder, you don't get any advantages. Why would you work harder?
That's exactly the question. But doesn't that kind of give you a sense of freedom? You only have to do so much and you're going to benefit. You have to put in your time and you benefit. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to slouch and slack. I appreciate, I'll bet you that's, Aisley is going to owe you something like a chocolate bar or something. If this is the case in the mentality, though, and a whole society is relying on this system, wouldn't we buy into it? It's kind of like us at Keniston School as an example. We're provided for, we've been given benefits by the school, and we want to give back to it, don't we? There is a mentality of that. That's a similar thing if you think about it. If you've been raised in this sense of mentality, then you can't really resent the fact that you can't climb above, because nobody can. So there's no wishful thinking. You're fully provided for to the same extent that every other person is provided for, right? Now, there are a handful of countries that have become part of this. For example, China is one, Cuba, North Korea. Now, Cuba, now it may not be, it may have recently changed, but it was for a long, long time. And it might have been just recently when America was able to, America lifted their trade ban with the US. For example, if you go to Cuba, you would see that they have cars from the 1960s. There's no Ford dealerships, no Ford manufacturing, like not Ford even maybe, but like there's no GM manufacturing plants in that country because there's no brands, right? So this is related to this. This is you can put in here related to the class struggles between rich and poor. And the other thing that we can put here is it's not just within one country. There is the global rich versus the global poor. We're talking whole countries that are rich, whole continents that are richer than other countries, right? So we could talk about that, where sweatshops end up being and who are the ones. So it could be something as an example, you know, America, a rich country, for example, that will be employing child labor. Because America is not a communist country. America will get the most out of its workers, even if the workers aren't in their own country, right? America is a for-profit country, has a for-profit economy, which is why if a lot of you I know have been paying attention to American politics, they make comments against socialism. But Canada has a socialist program. We have our available healthcare, available education system. It's based on a tax system, but it is provided to us, which gives us some freedom, right? So that is that. There are some pros and cons, again, to a communist society. If it's a classless society, everybody is equal. Government gives you your healthcare. There is no concept of poor or rich because everybody is in the same boat. Everybody gets what they need to survive, and it's considered kind of a utopia of sorts, right? But you don't get to speak out, no freedom of speech, you don't get to choose different religions, you don't get decisions in what brands you buy beans, that's it. There's no, yeah, you can't buy types of brands of baked beans, for example. It just was something that, it just, whatever popped out of my mouth here. And it goes against human nature that you don't really have any incentive to strive to work harder. And so in that, there is a con to it. And you are susceptible to the dictator that is making decisions. And so it depends whether or not your dictator is one that is looking out for the common good or starts looking out for self. So a pretty good rundown, and it helped a lot to have the notes typed out instead of having to handwrite them. Then your fingers and toes are all good to go for Among Us at break. Okay, it's 1:59. I guess we're going to stop. But in your handout, when we come back tomorrow, we're going to go through, there's your 04 that should follow this. Just stop. I'm not done. 04 is just one handout, and all it says is that in a democracy, the goal of government is to meet the needs of people. It's as simple as it. And then we have the 05 handout, and there are 5 different parts to Canada's democracy that are intending to ensure the protection of our decision-making process. And it will be followed by a kind of web search question and answer assignment. And we're going to get that done maybe by Friday or Monday, Tuesday, but certainly before the Christmas break. And then
there's an inquiry project, a research project, and you get to pick from a whole bunch of different topics and can study different countries.
So that's what's coming. That's your preview trailer. Okay. When we return, you need scissors. Well, if you don't have scissors, I have 7.
Are we starting?
Coloring, you're starting with the craft. I'll tell you, I kind of suspect, well, I will stop the recording before I say this.